Morning, coffee in hand. So, this is probably the fifth time I've actually recorded this. For one technical reason or another, I've had a few problems trying to get sound for one thing or another. I'm not going to go into it, it's just too boring. But this one is called What the Hell is ZenCore? So unless you've been living under a stone, you probably know that Roland have issued a number of new gadgets recently, namely the Fantom, the Jupiter-X, the XM, the GrooveBoxes 707 and 101. And all of them claim to have this new technology, this ZenCore technology, that is sort of kind of the next evolution. To me, ZenCore does sound something like you'd hear in a sci-fi movie. You can just imagine Captain Kirk and Mr. Sulu, engage the ZenCore engine, please. Warp factor 5. It's got that sort of sound to it, but of course, that's exactly not what it is. It is sort of the next generation of their modeling technology for legacy synths. Well, I say the next generation of modeling technology. It is something a bit more than that. But really, in order to understand what this is and where the circle comes in, I think we need to think about where you started. So traditionally, if you wanted to play an instrument on another instrument, you bought one of these. Okay, this is my S750. It's one of the samplers that I have in my stable. I have an Akai 6000, I have this, I have a Yamaha TX16W, I have an S50, I also have the sampling capabilities of the Oasis and the sampling capabilities of the Cronus. So I've got a number of different instruments available to me to do this stuff. But traditionally you went and bought one of these, okay? I'll put that down there because it's quite heavy. And what you did with these samplers, and depending on how sophisticated your sampler was effectively you pressed a note on the keyboard or the instrument you wanted, or you played a note on the instrument you wanted to sample. You told the sampler what note you were playing, and then the sampler, by some weird magic gadgetry things and mathematics, then extrapolated the tone, the frequency of what was being played, and then applied it to the other keys on the keyboard. So effectively, if you sampled a C3, middle C, it would then work out what B3, A3, G2, going the other way, D3, E3, D3, E3, F3, G3, etc. It would work that all out for you, and effectively you were able to play that instrument on your sampler. And back in the day we all went and did that, and the more sophisticated samplers allowed you to take different samples at different points in the octave range. So you could take one at C3, at C4, at C5, and then it would allow you to it would then do the calculations, but by taking them at different points in the on the keyboard or in the octave range, if you like, what the sampler was effectively doing was it was then starting to work out, if you like, the subtle variations as you went higher and lower up the octaves with the particular instrument you were sampling. But that's in essence what you did. So and I still do it today. I still go and say, I quite fancy that sound, but I want to play around with it. So I sample it into my good old sampler, and then that sound appears, and then I can play around with it. Now, what's wrong with this method of sound reproduction? Absolutely nothing. Okay? There is nothing wrong with doing this. But there is a problem. There is a problem with sampling, and everyone's going to say, what are you talking about? The problem with sampling is that when you sample an instrument, or you sample a synthesizer for argument's sake, you're sampling the processed sound, as in the sound that comes out of the instrument after you've applied filters and oscillators and effects and God knows what else to it. Okay, so you're effectively sampling the process signal. You're sampling the end product. What you're not doing is sampling the generation. You're not allowed, so you can't generate and then effectively apply everything on top of it. Now you could do that. You can, on some keyboards and some instruments, obviously if you're playing an instrument, you are getting that raw. But typically on a synthesizer, and definitely a lot of synthesizers, there's a lot of stuff applied to it by the time the sound is actually generated and comes out the jack plugs at the back. Definitely for a keyboard anyway. So that means that if you want to fiddle with that sound, as in you want to change the dynamics of how that sound is produced, you have to fiddle with the keyboard and then resample it. I've been there, done that, worn the t-shirt. Everybody's been there, done that, worn the t-shirt. But that's in essence what you had to do. If you wanted to change the construction of the sound, you resampled it. And then you ended up with several samples with different filters and different effects and different various bits and bobs on it. That was sampling. And to be honest, up until a few years ago, that's pretty much how you did it, unless somebody was very clever and they were able to program the next instrument with the sounds that you had on the previous instrument in a certain way that allowed you to play that instrument as if it was the old instrument. So, quite often with sort of things like the Oasis and the Kronos, people have effectively regenerated the sound using the engines on those instruments to effectively reprofile it to get a sound that is not the same, but very, very similar, to the point where it's very difficult to actually tell the difference between what's being generated by the new instrument and what's being generated by the old instrument. So, then along came Roland a few years back, and Roland came along a few years back and said, we've solved this, we're now going to introduce ACB, or Analog Circuit Behaviour. Now, the whole idea of this technology was to allow them to actually model how the sound was generated. So what I mean by that is, rather than sampling the sound once it had been generated, they were modeling how the sound is actually generated by the instrument itself and reproducing that. So they're reproducing the way the sound is generated. Now this is quite a bit different to taking a sample, because with a sample you're effectively taking the waveform as generated and released by the instrument through speakers or whatever. But with this, what you're actually doing is you're going back to basic principles and say, well, if it generates off a sawtooth wave, we're going to start with a sawtooth wave, and then if it applies this filter and it applies this effect, then we're going to do the same thing. So theoretically, you get the same sound generated in the same way. And because they generate the sound in the same way, but they all do it digitally, so it's a digital modeling process, the sound that is generated is very close. I mean, I've seen people put the sound for the original instrument and the sound of the new instrument on an oscilloscope, and they are almost, not completely, but almost exactly the same. And you're looking at that at a sound wave level. So with this new technology, Roland introduced the ARIA range. They introduced the TR8 that modelled a TR808 and modelled a TR909 and a 626. And then through an expansion pack, you also got the 707 and the 727. So you effectively got all those classic drum machines on the TR8. And that's the reason why I went and bought one, because I got all the classic drum machines on a TR8. And then they also released at the same time, they released the TB3, which is the TR303 baseline unit. And again, I went and bought one of those because I wanted a TR303 baseline unit, but I wasn't prepared to pay several £1,000s for it. So it was a worthwhile alternative. Then Roland turned their attention to something called the System 1. Now the System 1 then took this one stage further. So where with the TR808 and the TR909 you had some parameters you could change, the System 1 looked at some legendary synthesizers, modelled the circuitry and effectively allowed you to play around with the way the sound is generated in the oscillators, how the VCOs are applied, how filters are applied, how effects are applied. So effectively you start with the same tone generation, but you can end up with your very own SH101, System 100, ProMars SH2 synthesizer sound being generated digitally by the System 1, but being a unique sound that you have created. That's where they went. Then along came the boutique range, and the boutique range, rather than having a plug-out synthesizer, which was what the System 1 was, the boutique range was an individual, and we're all used to those boutique items, was an individual instrument in a box. Effectively, the front of the instrument looked very similar to the old style keyboard, but obviously shrunk down with no keyboard on it. And then they applied the same analog circuitry behavior modeling to these little instruments and then sold them. So if you wanted the Jupiter-8, there was the JU-8. If you wanted the Juno 106, there was the JU-06. Was it Juno? Anyway, but you get the drift. And there was a D50, and then they did the drum machine. So there's a 90, there's a 909 and an 808, and I suspect there's going to be more of these little mini instruments coming out over the period of time, because it seems to be quite a good cash spinner for Roland. But this all worked on this ACB. Then Roland because System 1 was limited, and it is limited, so Roland expanded System 1 and came up with System 8. Okay, this is my System 8. Okay, very light actually. The System 8 is very plasticky. It's one of the things I don't like about the System 8, but it's an incredible little synthesizer. And onto the System 8, effectively what they then did is they then applied plug-outs of the Jupiter, the Juno, the JX3P onto this, plus the System 8 synthesizer itself. So you ended up with a number of synthesizers on this, which you bought. You bought those; they came as sort of part of the package, and then you could go off and buy the same plug-outs that came with the System 1, and you could apply those on here. So you ended up with a very nice instrument there. Now, the System 8, unfortunately, is limited to 8 notes, or 8 polyphony as we used to call it, but everyone now calls it voices. So the System 8 came along, everybody ran to the thing and said, right, I'm going to buy a System 8. 8 voices limitation, I can live with that for the classic sounds of those synthesizers. So, you know, I have on my System 8 got a Jupiter-8. I've also got a Jupiter-80 in the studio, but the two are not related. You know, they have the same name, Jupiter, but in terms of how they work, it's like the 4 to the 6 to the 8. They all worked in different ways. They just had effectively the same Jupiter name and background lineage. So, analog circuitry behavior, very compelling technology, allows you to get the old synthesizers into the new world of playing. Why is it so compelling? Well, it's compelling because a Jupiter-8 has, so let's put it this way, the old style synthesizers have their 4 balls in terms of how they work. So after a while, a Jupiter-8 would start to drift off frequency. It was a standard problem. Everybody knew about it. When it got hot, it decided to do its own thing. So that's one of the reasons why the System 8 became compelling. The problem with the System 8 was Roland seemed to have dropped support for the System 8. Now, there was somebody on one of the channels with the new stuff that's been launched recently who turned around and said, no, we haven't dropped support for the ACB technology, but there are limitations. Now, I think this is the reason why Roland have now moved to the ZenCore technology, because there are limitations in the System 8 or in the ACB world, and I suspect the limitations are over processing power. to generate or digitally model and generate the old schools or the old style synths, the way they've done it is probably quite processor and memory intensive. And I suspect this is one of the reasons why all of a sudden we've gone to ZenCore technology. And I suspect ACB, although I think ACB will carry on for a while in terms of boutiques, I suspect ACB will start to sort of ramp back in favour of ZenCore. So now we get on to, how does ZenCore work? Well, the lineage is obviously, as I said, you went from samplers, you then went to this analog circuitry modelling, and now we've gone back to PCM samples again. So the whole thing's gone complete round the loop. So effectively what Roland have done is they've gone and sampled very high quality samples, but they've gone and sampled the instruments and generated the PCM wave file, and that PCM wave file is what is then loaded into the ZenCore engine. So now you have a wave file that is being generated the same way as the original instrument, and then you can apply on top of that wave file the filters and the effects and anything else that the original instrument had after generation. This is the key to the ZenCore technology, and it's probably one of the reasons why they have made a number of statements about it. The ZenCore technology can do more voices. So one of the videos, the demonstrator said 256. Well, let's even say it's 128 voices. That's considerably more than the 8 voices you get on the System 8. Okay, so it has more. It probably has more processing power in it anyway, but it's not as processor hungry, so it allows you to generate more voices simultaneously, which is good, because on the Jupiter-X, of course, they then say that you can actually play, you can arpeggiate 4 different sounds plus a drum track on the arpeggiator, and that will arpeggiate quite a few notes. And I don't know how many notes off the top of my head, how many notes it will arpeggiate, but you can assume it's going to be something like 32 notes for each one of those sounds, which is quite a lot. You can't do that on the System 8. That is something that the System 8 and the Jupiter-8, the Jupiter-X and XM are completely different at. Now, what's really interesting about this whole PCM malarkey is that the PCM malarkey is exactly how Roland generated the synthesis for the old LA synthesizers, predominantly the D50. So we've gone back to a technology they were comfortable with. It's obviously been updated in terms of how it works and how the digital structures work and how the effects and filters are plumbed in. But it's something they were very comfortable with back in the day, and they've just updated it. So we've gone full circle, sampling, analog circuitry behaviour, back to PCMs, and a hybrid between the two. So you've got the wave sample being generated, and then you're able to digitally apply the filters and everything else that you would have done on the original synthesizer once the waveform had been generated. So now that is what ZenCore is all about. It also explains why Roland make the claims that you can transfer the tone files from the Fantom to the Jupiter-X, XM, and probably a number of other synths that they're going to release over the coming years. I expect they're all going to be based on the ZenCore technology. There's going to be a bunch of interchanges between the various models. Each one will have to have a unique selling point, otherwise why would you buy it? But that is where ZenCore comes from. As I said, it's installed on everything that's been recently released, so that's the Fantom, the Jupiter-X, the XM, the GrooveBoxes 101 and the 707, all has this ZenCore technology at the heart of how it works. So, I don't think this is the last thing that Roland are going to introduce in the short term. I think there's more to come. I do think they will probably start to look at some of the other ARIA bits that they've implemented so far, and maybe they will be moved onto ZenCore. I do believe there's going to be an MX2, given the noises that people have have suggested on the channel that people are struggling to get hold of MX1s. That could be an indication that that's coming to the end of a production run, and maybe there's something coming to replace it. So there you go. What is ZenCore, or what the hell is ZenCore technology all about? And it's not about Star Trek. Now, live long and prosper. Bye-bye. Remember, hit that like button if you like what you saw. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified about more rants, more mailbag, more questions and answers, and more videos about this sort of stuff when it's loaded to the channel. Until next time, bye-bye.